I'm Mike Useem. I'm on the faculty here at the Wharton School, a colleague of Cade and Adams, and wow, what a great conference so far. So thank you to them and to their team and Stephanie and others for bringing the event to life. And our topic now, the next 30 minutes, I'd like you to be thinking about this personally as I describe the topic, is to learn from past mistake. I think it's a good idea. Here, a couple words, and then I'll introduce the panel here who's going to talk us through that. It's a good idea to look to our past to see what we did well, and equally, and maybe more importantly, to see what we did not do so well. The U.S. Armed Services have developed that way of thinking over actually a couple centuries with the after-action review. Take a look back, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do better next time we're out. And by case example, now a little bit dated, but still very instructive. Some of you of a certain age may remember when Intel came out with a new chip, Pentium, that did have a extremely small floating point problem. 7 or 8 digits down, it did make an error. And Andy Grove, then running Intel, famously said, look, that mistake is so small that the world can't worry about it. We're shipping the chip. Just suck it up and live with it. What he didn't appreciate, I think, were a couple things. Number one, IBM pretty quickly said they're not going to ship their PCs with that Pentium in it. That was significant. But more importantly, Andy Grove did learn that the internet was out there and that issues become widely communicated, and pretty quickly he backed off, recalled that chip, an expensive recall after standing by it initially, and he has said, I learned a lot from that mistake. I learned, first of all, that the internet is up and running, and it does create a certain kind of demand upon people like us that we're kind of in public by definition, very big time because of the internet. But he said also, and this really helped him think about how he ran Intel since then, that when we think about the Intel brand, I try to create it, I promote it, but we're kind of co-branded in the sense that our brand is partly what we say, what we do, but also partly what other people say about us and what they do. And in my initial attitude, I kind of thought we make the brand, but learning from the Pentium recall, I now better appreciate that we all make the brand together. Intel was better for that going forward. So what we're going to ask our 4 panelists to do now is, with a certain amount of candor, thank you, to talk about a mistake that they have made in people analytics. I'm going to ask them also to reference the mistake and then, like Andy Grove, tell us what you did learn from it. And I think for this 30 minutes to really come to life, I'd like you now to think of your own people analytics error. Find one, think about it right now, and then second part of the question here, what did you learn from that you were going to take forward? So very quickly, our 4 panelists, thank you for volunteering. Prasad Setty, second here on my left, is Vice President, People Analytics and Compensation, Google. And just looking a little bit at Prasad's background, I note among many activities or many roles he's played, including those at Capital One and McKinsey, at one point he was helping to take care of toxic rocket fuel for the U.S. Army. So Prasad, how about that? Sean Waldheim at the end here, that your far right, is Vice President of Admissions, Teach for America. He's been there 15 years, Director of Admissions. 8,000 to 9,000 people become TFA teachers through what Sean does. And Sean, I just want to probably offer a thanks on behalf of us all for picking some really great people who become your people in TFA. Ryan Dullaghan, Manager, People Assessment and Analysis at JetBlue, has written, just a small factoid about him, has written, small fact, that the second most important asset at JetBlue, first being employees, is data. I think that's why we're in this room today and tomorrow with that same notion that data is an unbelievable asset. And Karyn Marciniak, you've already met in our previous incarnation here on stage. And among other things, Karyn at Facebook, and I think where she is now at 2 Sigma, has helped think through how do you know if an interviewer is really good at interviewing. So with that, I'm actually going to start with Prasad. Just a couple minutes on the error you made and what you learned from it.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah. So I used to be a chemical engineer, and that's why the reference to rocket fuel and so on, who's made the transition to the people space. And there are lots of similarities, actually. People can be pretty volatile and toxic too, right? But the good thing about chemicals, they never talk back. So I've been doing people analytics for many, many years now, more than a dozen, actually. And Cade Massey said that he thought about me first when he thought about the people that should be on the panel about mistakes. So at least I have some dubious distinction and recognition for all the blunders that I've contributed to in this space. I wanted to share an example from Google. So I've been leading the people analytics group out there since its founding in 2007. And in fact, my job description when I was hired read HR analytics, and I had hopefully some good thinking on naming it people analytics. It just sounded so much better. And initially, we came up with a mission for the people analytics group. And we said we want it to be as broad as possible. We are not just going to focus on hiring or retention or promotions. We just wanted to encompass everything that we do on the people side at Google. So we came up with a mission for our team that said, all people decisions at Google should be made based on data. And if you think about an organization our size, we make thousands of people decisions every year, and we wanted to bring this type of analytical thinking into that. Initially, we had a very strong form of the statement, or that's at least what I thought we should be thinking about. We wanted it to be such that people analytics automatically made these decisions. And there was an example that very quickly showed me that that wasn't the right way to approach it. Karyn Marciniak, who is out here, used to, also an ex-Wharton alum, used to run what we call our engineering promotion process. This is one of the biggest undertakings we have at Google. We fly in twice a year, hundreds of our senior-most engineers around the world, and we host them at the Santa Clara Marriott because we don't have enough conference rooms at Google. We break them up into committees of 4 to 5 people each, and these committees are then reviewing nominations of people who put themselves up for promotion. On our engineering side, we allow people to self-nominate themselves for promotions. They can say, I'm ready, please consider me for promotion. A huge undertaking, taking up at least a couple of days every 6 months of our senior-most people, considering thousands of these nominations. And we said, there must be surely a way of coming up with effective decision-making, but also make it more efficient. Surely we don't need all these people. Because in addition to these primary committees, we had appeals committees, in case you disagreed with the decision of the primary committee. We then had appeals of appeals committees. It was basically like the Supreme Court process to figure out who gets promoted at Google. So our team came up with an empirical algorithm. And we found that when we looked at all the information that was going to these committees, we found that for a third of the cases, with 90% accuracy, we could predict who's going to get promoted. We backtested it. We found it to be a very stable model across multiple cycles, and we were really excited. We went to the engineers and said, we can immediately cut your workload by 30%. Instead of flying in 600 engineers, you only need 400 this year. And over time, we are sure that our model will continue to improve. And maybe at some point down the road, all you'll need are these appeals committees, and that's it, because the algorithm is going to make these perfect promotion decisions. We thought our engineers who lived in the world of search algorithms and ads algorithms every day would love this. They hated it. They wanted no part of an algorithm. They said, these are such important decisions that we want people to make them. Going back to the previous conversation about black boxes, that's exactly what they said. We don't want to hide behind a black box when someone comes to me and says, why didn't I get promoted? They wanted to take ownership of this. So that changed my mind completely about what people analytics stood for. We weren't going to be in the business of substituting for humans who actually make these decisions. We want to make them better. And Dean Garrett talked about it in the morning as well, right? The best thing, just as in the chess example, where the human chess players, along with machines, were able to defeat other chess-playing computers. That's exactly how we want to think about all the work that we do in art space. We want to assist all these people because every one of us is biased, every one of us has a worldview, and we think that some of it might be right based on good judgment and robust information that you have picked up over time, but some of it is just completely us being clueless or us having actually the wrong heuristics. And so analytics can help us all make better decisions, and that is really what we're up to in people analytics.
Prasad, terrific. Thank you on that. And I'm thinking we got the name of this conference right, People Analytics. Very good. Sean, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Interesting. I'm going to talk about a similar theme, but in a different context. I want to talk specifically about the balance between quantitative and qualitative work in my case, hiring decisions of teachers in low-income communities. And just to kind of like make a long story short, around 2004 is when we built our first statistical models that we were using to inform how we were hiring our teachers. As you go forward over the next couple of years, we really invested heavily in the quantitative parts of this work. We, took the amount of data we collected from like 7 data points to like 50, lots of feedback cycles and stuff, and this is where the mistake comes into play. Really what I was finding is that our interviewers were interacting with the data in a way that made them feel like their job was to crunch the numbers, turn on a computer, and it really took that like incredibly important like critical thinking and judgment out of that equation. And that was really a point where we started to realize like, gosh, we have got to have a model that is quantitatively robust, but also qualitatively robust. So just as like a very concrete example, we have really extensive feedback cycles after each time that our interviewers make admissions decisions with candidates. Initially, the feedback that they got was on the quality of their note-taking and the accuracy of their calibrations, as well as some feedback from candidates. Today, if you look at the feedback that our interviewers get, it's much more about their judgment. Like how, to what degree did they actually understand the candidate's story? And are they thinking about like both like the data that they collected, because we care a lot about that, but are they actually drawing those connections between how the candidate did in the activities that we have that try to approximate the things that we actually care about, but using their understanding of the candidate to recognize when those calibrations seem very accurate and when there could be mistakes. So in a very similar way, at least as I think of it, I almost think of it as like the yin and the yang between qualitatively robust and quantitatively robust, and we've thought about how to actually use data to inform both of those parts. But I think it was a real like key moment for me personally, and thinking, gosh, all this time creating feedback loops, all of this time I'm building out huge example sets to like make the data as accurate and consistent as possible. Like that absolutely can't come at the expense of people feeling like they're just like inputting numbers in a computer and turning on a calculator.
Great. Sean, a quick question from me. Yeah. Good that we learn from our own achievements and our own setbacks. We get better, and even better for others if they can avoid the setbacks we've experienced and can learn from us. You've got first cousins all over the world. There are Teach Fors in many countries now, affiliated, but not yours. So have some of the other Teach Fors elsewhere come to you for guidance on what to do?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a network. It's called Teach for All. It pulls together all of those organizations in a real form of collaboration, and the learning goes both ways. I mean, that's the real cool part. Like, there's a lot that, given our history, that folks can learn from us, and we try to make that very visible. There's also a tremendous amount that we learn from our partners all over the world in very different contexts who are starting fresh, given everything that's been learned collectively. Went to Peru a couple years ago, and I just like, my whole way of thinking about like how we're talking about leadership, how we're thinking about leadership, that's for another day. But like learning from them, a new program is also tremendously helpful. So that learning absolutely goes both ways.
Great. Sean, thank you. Ryan, JetBlue.
It sounds like we already have some common experiences, but I'm going to choose a different example that ends up aligning not with something already said in this session, but the last session. I want to talk about the importance not only of understanding that initial question, but the context around why that question was asked. So here's my story. About a month after I started at JetBlue, my VP came to me and my team and asked us to validate our measure of engagement. So I was so excited. This was right up my alley. I love doing that sort of a thing, creating a data model, saying this, predicts that. So that's what I did. I grabbed our engagement measure, made sure that we could predict it with other things we were measuring from our culture survey, and then tied it to a bunch of our performance metrics all across the company. It was beautiful. And we did a great job. I did some factor analysis. I did some no multi-level modeling, but I made sure it could replicate across our pilots, across our flight attendants, across our call center, all our different work groups. So we go to present it to her, and it was probably a 45-minute presentation because she loves getting into the details. Then at the end, she was like, "So when are you going to validate engagement?" What I said context earlier. The context that I wasn't aware of when I went down this path, and a couple, probably 3 weeks of work put into building this model, was our measure of engagement was relatively new. We had the previous team, somebody who is in the audience actually, had built this new measure of engagement, and we implemented it. But my VP wanted to know, is this the right measure? Did we build it right? What she really wanted was me to pit alternate models against each other, make sure we were measuring it the right way. The context, I just wasn't aware of the context. That made so much more sense once she explained the context, and that was the need that I didn't address through my work. So you have to understand the context, even if you think you understand the question.
That's great. And that's a great segue. Thank you, Ryan. Over to Karyn. And Karyn, just to connect with the prior session, I think we all registered on what Ryan just said. Knowing what the question really is, then you can answer the right question, which may not be on the surface.
So I think a lot of my errors or mistakes have fallen under this category that I've grown to think of as bulldozing over the softer side of HR data. So again, being a data person, I sometimes just see the numbers. And so early on at Facebook, the head of recruiting was trying to figure out kind of how to staff out the team. We were trying to hire a lot of people, and she wanted to know more about recruiter productivity. So I worked with her, and we built this model, and because you can't really compare recruiter productivity across teams, because hiring for engineers is different from hiring for salespeople and junior and senior. And so we thought, okay, we'll just compare within teams. So she liked it. It was a great model. It encompassed all sorts of things, and it was controlling for tenure and all the questions that I knew I would get asked. And so she said, okay, that's great. Let's bring this to the team meeting, and you'll present it to all of the recruiting managers who lead the teams of recruiters. So this is about 10 people globally, pretty senior. And so I go in and I show them my model, and I pull up this data that shows their individual recruiters' productivity rates compared to each other. And it did not go well, we'll say. There were a lot of concerns, and it turns out that you can't just throw up numbers about people to their managers in front of their peer managers, because it caused a lot of just confusion. And what I didn't realize, again, going back to context, is that there was a little bit going on the team that, we're trying to figure out how to staff the team. And so some managers were going to lose the recruiters that they had on their team to other teams. And here they were fighting to keep the people on their teams in consistent roles, where they're familiar. And here I am showing who's the best recruiter. And I didn't realize that my numbers actually have to do with people's jobs. They affect people very directly. And now I know a lot better that that I love data about people, as I said, but that kind of comes with this whole other side of things that I need to think about.
Karyn, thank you. Let me just, a quick question. We don't have a lot of time here. When we've had a bad day or things go quite poorly or we're a little bit set back and maybe even feeling a little bit sheepish or even humiliated, some of us, I raise my hand, would like to sort of climb into a hole for a while. But there's an argument that when things go badly, let's face up to it and let's talk about it among colleagues and others. So when you had your setback, whoever wants to pick up on this, how long did it take you to start talking with others about this and what you learned from it? Just sort of talk that through, one of you. Prasad, you want to start?
Yeah,
Sure,
I can start us off. So just to go complete that story, we still fly in hundreds of our senior-most engineers. We still book up the Santa Clara Marriott, so nothing has changed with that process. But for us, certainly, it changed the way I thought about what our team should be doing. And a lot of what we do is really suggesting and assisting all these human decision makers, right? So that really changed the way we thought about what is all this predictive analytics work and where should that go? And how much of this can be automated. Because until then, we were still having this pipe dream, until this experience with the promotion situation. Sergey Brin, one of the co-founders of Google, has always felt that interviews are a waste of time. I think we heard that earlier this morning. And he wanted the ideal algorithm that would sift through the 3 million applications we get every year to suggest who are the few thousand that we should hire, right? So that is what he wanted. Unfortunately, Sergey, I don't think you're going to get it, right? I think that is one of the lessons that we got from this experience.
Super. Brian?
So my example actually just now was the first time I've talked about it, honestly. And I think my director can attest to that. I don't think we ever actually talked about it afterwards. We just moved forward and didn't really reflect, and that may have not been the best decision. But in retrospect, I realized in the moment I just was mad that I missed the point and disappointed. Well, number one, I was new to the company, so you never want to have that kind of mistake right off. But I really respect my VP as a person, so I didn't want to personally disappoint her.
Karyn?
Well, mine was pretty live in the room. It was a lot of live action going on there. So we addressed everything up front. But I think I definitely learned, from reflecting after that I need to sit down with individual managers to go over that type of sensitive data, and that was the message they were giving us as well.
Great.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, this is a theme. I mean, this is something that like the qualitative and quantitative, that's a tricky balance to strike always. I think the biggest aha for me is just paying attention to the tensions, like literally like underneath it, being like, gosh, like, why are we spending so much energy on training, on quality control, on all of those pieces? Like, what is the context that's causing that to be true, and how could we address that? So I wish I could say it was just like this like out of bed aha moment of like crystal clarity, but really it was over time and just like paying attention to those tensions, really understanding the questions that people had, and like honestly wanting to hear the questions that people had and what felt off, and being like, gosh, you're now the third person who said something to me very similar. I better really like pause and think about what these individuals were saying to me.
This is great. We've got about 7 minutes to go, and a kind of a transition into a final question. I'll personalize this. A while ago, I, for research reasons, ended up sitting down with the person who created Lenovo. He doesn't run it day to day anymore, but built Lenovo from scratch. And I sort of asked the obvious question: how did you build Lenovo when there was no precedent, there was no textbook, there were no MBA programs, no business training at the time in China? This is soon after Deng Xiaoping got reform going in the 1980s, and he said it was really actually quite easy. He sat down every week with the people who reported to him directly, and he said, how did we screw up this week? Let's not do that next week. But then he also said, what do we do well? So final question, about a minute apiece, maybe begin with you, Karyn. Looking back on your experience in people analytics, what's something that went very well that you have learned from?
I think something that's going well now is that I've learned to reiterate that request that I've heard back to the original stakeholder before I get started. So I think I heard early on that you have to tell people what you're saying, then say it, then tell people what you said, and it's a similar thing. So I get the request, and then I literally say it right back to them, usually in an email summary. And if I wait a day or two, I found that often the request has changed. So it's good that I haven't started that analysis yet. So just circling back with that original stakeholder in an ongoing way has been really helpful.
Terrific. Mark that one down, everybody. Sean, how about you?
Sure. I mean, absolutely the continuous learning. I mean, at the center of our work is a very critical question, like what differentiates our most effective teachers and how can we recognize that at the stage of hiring? And literally every month we are learning new things about it. Like this is not something we do once a year. Like the reflection process is happening constantly, and we're constantly learning and asking questions and trying to answer them. So when we do make mistakes, it helps us pick ourselves up pretty quickly.
Yeah, great. Ryan?
I think that, so we have a minute, right? So there was another mistake that you need for the context. I designed our hiring system. So there was a hiring system I designed, and I thought yes meant, yay, this is exciting, let's do it. But really it meant let's see. What it turned out I didn't do a good enough job getting involvement from the recruiting team initially, so they felt a little distance from the changes. So my success was the very next project where I made sure that I involved every recruiter, the managing of the recruiting team, and then as much of the leadership for that group as I could, just to get that buy-in from the very beginning and throughout the 6 months of the project. There's been no resistance, there's full buy-in for it. So the lesson is really the comparison, like getting that involvement pays huge dividends.
Great, terrific. Prasad?
So I would say a focus on starting with the science and starting with the problem statement rather than the data. I think there's a lot of emphasis on, well, we can't go anywhere in the space because we first need the data. And I think that's always going to be a limiting factor. You'll never have the data that you want, and you'll never have access to it in at the level of detail that you want as well. And so we have turned it all the way around. So our reporting team is very important, the people that actually manage all of our data on our scorecards and dashboards, but they sit completely separate in another part of the organization. They're separate from people analytics. We basically said to the business leaders, if you have a question about how many people did I hire, or what does this stat mean, and what is this historic data, you tell them, go talk to the reporting team, then they can pull that data for you, or they'll provide a dashboard where you can access it. If you want to know how to solve a particular people-related business problem you have, then come talk to us. We'll either be able to test it out with some hypotheses and analysis looking at previous data, or we'll run experiments for you. And so shifting the focus to problems rather than the data, I think has been one of the biggest learnings for us.
Got a closing question, and we're about 2 minutes from station break here. By my calculation, we have a lot of years of experience in people analytics on stage. If you've got one piece of advice for people who are getting into it but haven't had the experience you've had, what would that be? I'll leave it, whoever wants to start on that one.
Yes, and.
Outstanding. Ryan?
Oh gosh, I guess just make sure you have a full understanding of your data, even if you're not analyzing it. Make sure that you understand from your analysts that you know exactly what each data point means.
Super.
Say, get in the field. In my case, it's files and decisions, it's classrooms. Like it's the time in the field that I think gives the most insight in terms of the research.
Great. Yep.
Sit at the table.
Great, fantastic. Let me see, I'd like you all to think about your own moment, both on that negative side, that is when things didn't go so well. Also think about when things did go well. Ask yourself what ought to be carried forward from both. But anyway, quick 15-second summary. People analytics, kind of a long march. And we've been on it for quite a few years, but much more intensively. We even have a name for it now. And I think we learn by doing. Maybe that's the best road. That's what we've heard today. You've learned a lot from some stumbles you've made, some insights you've had along the way. And maybe equally importantly, the very purpose of this conference, we can learn an awful lot from each other. And for all the learning we've had from these 4 panelists today, would you please join me in thanking them? Thank you very much.